so much for that good song. I'm going to ask you to turn tonight, if you would, to Job, chapter number 1. I appreciate you putting up with me today. Got a lot of sinus issues, and voice not good, but I appreciate you putting up with me. I'll be honest, as you sing the song, I'm not sure what I'm going to say tonight. It may just be real short. I'm not sure. But more than preaching a message, I kind of, Pastor talks about a fireside talk. The message tonight, I kind of want to have a family talk, okay? A little bit of family talk with us here at Ambassador Baptist Church. Stand with me if you would, please. I hope you'll pray for me. I haven't been feeling well today, but I pray the Lord will help us tonight. I do believe this is what the Lord will have me to preach, and just trust Him, if He would, to speak to your heart. I've asked Him to speak to mine, to touch me. I need it tonight too. Notice chapter 1 of Job, verse 20. I'll read there through verse 22. Then Job arose and rent his mantle, shaved his head, and fell down upon the ground and worshipped, and said, Naked came I out of my mother's womb, and naked shall I return thither. The Lord gave, and the Lord hath taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. In all this Job sinned not, nor charged God foolishly. And you may be seated tonight. When you study your Bible a while, you realize that there's a lot of meaning even in the little words, if I can put it that way, the little words of the Bible. And so when I read this years back, but when you read in verse number 22, you read the three words, in all this. Probably doesn't take me but 1 or 2 seconds to say those words, in all this. And for years and years, I read that and just kind of passed over it. It seemed like the thing that was important in that verse was that Job sinned not, nor charged God foolishly. But I believe this. I believe if Job was here tonight and could stand before us, I believe those words would be very weighty to him. I believe tonight if Job could stand here and hear those words, in all this, it might give him that sick feeling in his stomach that we have once in a while, because he would think about what is the this in all this. You see, I believe in all this was contained the darkest time in Job's life. Job was under a terrible trial, and folk, it wasn't one of those everyday trials that we face. I believe I could say this was more like one of those fiery trials that Peter talked about that happens to us along life's way. And so, for a little bit tonight, I want you to pause with me, and I want to get kind of through this introduction so I can get to what I want to say tonight. But I needed for us to do this. I want us to consider tonight, what was the this in the words in all this for Job, okay? Can I say, first of all, I look at it and I think in all this there was a trial of an adversary. And I'm not going to take time to read it, but you can read verses 8 through 11. You remember when the sons of God presented themselves before God, the devil came with them. And no doubt, I believe the devil already had Job in mind. God knew that, because God said to Job, hath thou considered my servant Job, that he's upright and a good man. And the devil said, and I'm paraphrasing, said, the only reason Job serves you is because you've given him so much. If you'd take away all the blessings you've given him, he'd curse you to the face. And God said, all right, you can go ahead and take away all that he's got. God wanted to prove Job. And so, when you think about it, you realize that the most adamant being that's against you and I is that devil. I was thinking coming up the road, I hate the devil. I hate him because of things that he does in so many lives. And the devil, the Bible says that he's pictured as a roaring lion. He's walking about seeking whom he may devour. Now, he can't take our salvation. We know that. But I'll tell you one thing. He wants to ruin our testimonies. He wants to ruin our effectiveness for the Lord Jesus Christ. And I'll tell you one thing about the devil. He will tempt and he will harass and he'll ride you and I as God's people all the way through the grave. I remember when I was down in Tabernacle, Dr. Seitler said one time that in prayer meeting they had an elderly lady, gray-headed lady, stand up. And in the prayer meeting service, she said, I want to ask the church to pray for me. She said, the devil's giving me a hard time. And you know, you think that old coward would give up. You think he would allow somebody who's walked the way for that long, an elderly lady, you think he'd just come back and give up for a while and let her have just a few days and a few weeks and a few months of rest. But no, listen, he has no heart. And the devil's relentless. And you can mark it down in all this for Job. There was one of those spiritual battles, one of those spiritual wars that you and I go through from time to time. You remember what the Lord said to Peter? He said, Peter, the devil hath desired thee that he might sift you as wheat. But I've prayed for you that your faith fail not. I'm telling you, listen, the devil's a terrible adversary. The devil's a destroyer. The devil hates you and I. The devil like to ruin you and I. And when we read in all this, one of the things I believe in Job's life was this. He had a trial of the adversary. Listen, the devil set himself against Job. Then let me say, secondly, I see a trial of poverty. And you know, it's interesting in verses 14 and 17, what I see in there. And you know, they come in and said, look, the fire of God's fallen and destroyed the sheep and the camels. The Sabians came, the camels. But it said, and while one was speaking, another came in. And while that was speaking, another came in. And all these material things of Job was gone. Do you realize Job, he went from being the richest man in the East to one of the poorest in one day? You know, it's one thing, when you haven't had things, it can be a trial. I've heard people say along the way, brother, well, when we were growing up, we were poor, we just didn't know it. Well, when you don't have much, that's somewhat a trial. But here, when you have had things and then it's taken away from you, sometimes that's a trial indeed. Sometimes, I don't know about you, have you ever been, as a child of God, you look and you see other brothers and sisters, and boy, they're being blessed, and you're glad for it. They're being blessed materially. They're being blessed financially. They're out enjoying a whole lot of things, and here you are serving the Lord the best you can, working hard, and you can barely make ends meet. I remember one time, sometimes, you know, tragedy comes. I remember just a few years ago, there was a pastor and his wife up in Kentucky serving the Lord, and listen, they had a house fire, burnt their house down. Now, you can replace the structure, but you can't replace pictures, and you can't replace keepsakes and things like that. I tell you, it's hard to look somebody in the face when they've lost their house and lost those precious things that they've got. It's a hard trial as a child of God, say, when your business goes under. I bowled on a senior league a few years because that's the only way I could see my dad, and I'd go down there, and I had a lady embroider on two of my bowling shirts, John 3:16. She was saved, she had a business, but during COVID, her business went under. And since then, even till now, I think she's paying back, being honest, and paying back all those debts. I tell you, listen, that's a trial when you got a business, you're doing the best you can't have the circumstances, and you go under. It's a trial, as Brother Keith told us in Sunday school this morning, like he was one time. You have a good job, and you lose your job, and you don't have another one to go to. And so Job had a trial of that. Listen, Job went from having and enjoying to practically having nothing in one day. In all this meant that Job's material things was taken away. And then can I say for him also was a trial of sorrow. So the saddest scripture you read is verse 18. Let me read that. While he was yet speaking, talking about all the loss of material things, while they were still speaking, there came also another and said, thy sons and thy daughters were eating and drinking wine in their elder brother's house. Behold, there came a great wind from the wilderness and smote the four corners of the house, and it fell upon the young men, and they are dead. And I only am escaped along to tell thee. I can't imagine what it'd be to lose all your children one time. 7 sons and 3 daughters he lost. I'm so grateful tonight I've never had to bury one of my children. But I can still remember the hurt and the pain and the stares of Denise's mom and dad when in 1982 her brother, their only son, her brother had a car wreck. and lived 30 days in Baptist hospital and then passed away. I don't know what it's like to lose a child, but I know it's got to be a tremendous sorrow. I remember Dr. Seitler telling us when we were in school that he was off preaching a meeting one time and he got a call. And when he answered the phone, it was, I believe, a deacon from the church and said, Pastor Seitler, there's been a bad wreck. And his wife was in that wreck, and his little daughter, 12-year-old daughter, Carolyn Grace, was in the wreck. And his wife was hurt badly, but the little daughter was killed in the wreck. And I remember Dr. Seitler, you talk about pain and hurt. I remember Dr. Harold Seitler saying that when he got that call and that happened, he thought, how could I ever stand again and preach the grace of God? When he was hurt that bad. I cannot imagine the sorrow of Job's heart as he stood by 10 graves and said a temporary goodbye to his son and daughters. Listen, those little 3 words, in all this, meant there was a cemetery with 10 plots in it that held the bodies of his children. And not only that, but in all this, there was a trial of indictments. You go to chapter 8, you can read that. And while Job was crushed with all this he's received right here, and no divine explanation, God didn't tell him what was going on. We read it. Job didn't know. By the way, Job didn't have no Bible to read getting comfort either. But without any explanation whatsoever, here comes his friends. And listen, here's friends. Here's who you need help from. Here's who you need understanding, comfort from. But rather, you know what they did? They indicted him and implied this, Job, you must be a hypocrite. That's bad, isn't it? When you're under a trial, things are going rough. And then the friends come and say, Job, you must be a hypocrite. God's judging you. You must be lying. You've got to have sin in your life for God to judge you so. I'll tell you this much, it hurts when you're falsely accused and lied on. Some of the biggest hurts I've had along life's way, folks, come in the ministry when I've tried to help a few people and help them financially and help them spiritually and counsel them and do things for them. And then something happens, they leave the church, maybe they didn't like something I preached or something about the church, and then they go out and then they start spreading falsehood. It hurts. In all this, for Job meant that those who were supposed to be his friends turned on him. And when he needed them most, they said, you're a hypocrite. You're not right with God. God must be judging you. Then can I say fifthly, in all this there was a trial of sickness, verses 7 and 8. He had boils all over him. I remember when I was a little kid, growing up a few times, I had boils. I don't know what caused them, not had them since, but can you imagine this? Here's all this happened to Job, and now he's got boils from head to toe. He's sitting in ashes. He takes a piece of pottery and scrapes those putrefying boils. But can I tell you this? I believe worse than hurting from head to toe with boils was the hurt in his heart from all these other things that happened. Then can I say it was also a trial of domestic problems, verses 9 and 10. I mean, you'd think of all people, his wife would certainly give him comfort and help, because, by the way, it was her children too. And she was a part of that material things too. But when I read it, she told Job, said, just curse God and die. I hope I'm not wrong in this, but it seems to me that evidently she seemed to blame Job in his walk with the Lord for all those sorrows that had come upon them. It's hard enough, listen, it's hard enough when husband and wife go through terrible trials and you're together on it and serving the Lord together. But it's got to be multiplied harder when you got to walk the way alone and trust the Lord alone. For Job, listen, while the devil was probably whispering in his ear, hey, God's done all this to you, curse God and die, his wife seems to echo the same thing. So can I say tonight, folks, can you understand now just a little bit? We read those 3 words, in all this. But do you see what in all this contained for Job? And as I was thinking about this message, I thought, you know, Denise and I have been here 9 months now. And I thought over it, I thought, you know, what if we let some of you come up here tonight and stand before us and tell us what in all this would mean for you. I thought about 9 months we've been here, and I thought about what in all this would mean to some of our church family. I believe in all this, as far as the pastor's concerned, might mean when he got that telephone call, you remember? and found out that his sister-in-law was brother's wife, I think, in South Carolina. She was, late 40s and working, I think, at an ER trauma center, and she went into the bathroom, and it was a good while she hadn't come out, and somebody went in there, and they found her on the floor. And she was in bad shape. And I remember the pastor, Miss Kathy, they drove down. They sat several days there in the waiting room, praying and hoping that God would pull her through, and yet He didn't. She passed away. And there's his brother and children left behind. I believe the pastor could testify and say in all this was those days of waiting and praying and then seeing his brother and his children left by themselves. I thought of this, if we could have you testify in all this, I thought of Brian and Lena. Here they are, they're up in Michigan. They're visiting her family, had a good time. Here they're driving back. And they get somewhere, I guess, around Kentucky, brother, I'm not sure, in that area. All of a sudden, Brian has terrible pains in his side. Long story short, he ends up at the hospital in Louisville, Kentucky. His appendix has ruptured. He went under the knife and had surgery. But he testified to us the other Sunday, before he got to sing, he said the hardest part of it was being so far away from home and away from family. And he spent several weeks there trying to recoup. And he's still trying to get better for it. In all this would mean all that hospital staying a long way from home and all that for Brian. In all this, I thought about Sister Looper. In all this would be watching her husband's health decline and then having to say a temporary goodbye to him. I thought about Brother Dan. Brother Dan, if you could stand tonight, you and Miss Kathy, and testify in all this, it'd be Brother Dan runs and good and healthy, and I think it was a Saturday, maybe afternoon. Here he is indoors running. He's going to run, I guess, his allotted time, and his brother Dave told me you got about 80% of it completed, and you wasn't feeling good. So he sits down to rest a while, and then he thinks, well, I'll just push on, and he starts to run. And guess what? Out of nowhere, a heart attack. He ends up in the hospital, 100% blockage, I think, put a stent in, comes home, everything looks okay. We got a house cabin fever and wanted to ride, and him and Miss Kathy taking a ride to get near CVS Pharmacy on 321. Miss Kathy, if I remember right, you thought, sounded like maybe he coughed or something. You look over, and guess what? He's not breathing. His heart's not beating. And consequently, pull in the CVS Pharmacy, and here pulls a law officer, tries to do CPR in the car, but thank the Lord had sent, I think, a retired EMS worker or something, pulled him out of the car and did CPR, and now he's in the hospital, and here's his pacemaker, and here's the defibrillator, and Miss Kathy, here's all these weeks of sitting in the waiting room. His life's in the balance. Thank God here he is tonight, but still we're praying that his voice will come back. If you stand here tonight, and I know some of the things with others of you, but if you can stand here tonight, I think about Miss Amanda, her children, Brother Jeff. Tuesday night, I believe it was, Brother Aaron, I think maybe he's having some seizures. And take him up to Valdez, and they work on him. And we know what the outcome was. And I'm sure tonight, if I could ask you to come up here, there's a lot of stories I don't know about of what in all this would mean to you. But I want to close with this tonight. I want to give you what I believe Job learned and what you and I need to learn and keep in mind in all this. 3 things here, and we're done. Number 1, can I say to you tonight, in all this, God's grace is sufficient. God's grace is sufficient. God will give you and I what He promised the Apostle Paul, and that is, my grace is sufficient. Paul had an annoyance. It's called a thorn in the flesh. I believe the word, if I'm right, means more like a dagger. Don't think of a little thorn, it's a dagger. I don't know what the thorn in the flesh was. I'm not going to even try to say. I've got my own ideals of what it was. But I know this, it was something that was bothering Paul bad. And he went to the Lord, and 3 times he said, Lord, would you remove this? 3 times. And you know what the Lord said to him? Said, I'm not going to remove it. But here's what God said to him, and I quote, He said this, my grace is sufficient for you, for my strength is made perfect in weakness. You know what the Lord was saying to him? I believe He was saying this, Paul, I'm not going to remove it. It's molding you. It's making you. It's good for you. I'm not going to remove that thorn, but I tell you what I'll do. I'll give you grace sufficient to go through it. You know, before I left Lovelady about a year or so before, I was reading that one day, and I saw something that dawned on me. And you know what? It just hit me. God told Paul there, said, my grace is sufficient for you. He didn't say my grace is overflowing and abounding to where you won't feel the sorrow and you won't feel the pain of what you're going through. No, he said, my grace is sufficient. I'll give you enough grace. Yes, it'll hurt. Yes, it'll be hard. But I'll give you enough grace that you can go through whatever it is that you're going through. I think with you and I, at least with me, hey, most of the time, you know what? I want God to remove the circumstance. I want things to change. But sometimes God says, no, that's not what's best. But my grace is sufficient for you. So whatever you're going through tonight, I can stand here almost saved 47 years, been through some things too, just like you, but I can testify tonight and say, "'Tis grace that brought me safe thus far. Grace will take me home." His grace has always proved sufficient. It's hurt. It didn't make it to where there wasn't sorrow. It didn't mean that I didn't hurt. It didn't mean it wasn't difficult, but His grace has seen me through. God's grace is sufficient. Here's another thing. I can promise you, God won't put more on you than what you can bear if you'll look to Him for strength and help. 1 Corinthians promises that, 10:13. There's no temptation. I believe that word temptation there myself means trial. There's no temptation taking you, but such is common to man. But God is faithful, who will not suffer or allow you to be tempted or tested above that which you're able, but will with the temptation make a way of escape that you might be able to bear it. And so I believe God's promises there by the way of trial and testing. He's not going to let more be put on us than what we, through His strength and grace, can bear up under. I'll be honest with you. If I could put this analogy, if I could bear 19 and a half pounds of pressure, looking to the Lord with His help and grace. No, but if I could bear 20, but 20 and a half would be too much. Boy, there's sometimes, Brother Justin, I feel like I've had 19 and a half, couldn't take no more. You ever been like that? Feel like the Lord just can't take no more? Elijah sat down one time. You remember the trial got so heavy, run to Jezebel, he sat under a tree and said, "Lord, just take me on. I can't take this no more." Moses, one time in his life, caused a problem, sat down and said, "God, just take me on." Evidently, they felt like they'd had all they could take. As a matter of fact, Job, I believe, feels like he's had all he could take, because if you read on, he said this, he said he cursed the day that they announced his mom and dad, a male child was born in this world. But I'm going to tell you this, God's not going to put more on us than what we can bear. He promised us that. Sometimes the pressure seems almost unbearable, but His grace will be sufficient. He'll not take us beyond our capacity of what we, looking to Him, can bear up under. I like the words of this song. It says, "I am the healer when you need a touch. I'm the mender when life comes undone." That's a promise, so don't give up. The deeper the pain, the stronger the love. Child, I know, yes, I know, how much broken is enough. And He's not going to let us have more put on us than what we, with His help and grace and strength, can bear. And then thirdly, can I say this? In all this, I can promise you that God loves us and He pities His child. James said this, and I'll read it, chapter 5, verse 10. He said, "Take my brethren, the prophets who have spoken in the name of the Lord, for an example." Example of what? Of suffering, affliction, and patience. "Behold, we count them happy which endure. You've heard of the patience of Job and seen the end of the Lord, that the Lord is" what? "Very pitiful." That means He's extremely compassionate. He's very pitiful and of tender mercy. God loves His children. You know something? After Job had gone through all of this, the Bible tells us in Job 42:12, "So the Lord blessed the latter end of Job more than the former." God saw what he was going through, helped him get through it. Wouldn't allow. Remember, the devil said, "Well, I won't take." He said, "You can't take his life, you can't do it, but you can do this." Won't allow more on us than what we can take. And God blessed him after it was over more than he had before. I've experienced a few trials in my life. You probably have too. I've experienced a few trials where I thought, Lord, I'm not going to make it. I felt like I was going under. But I can testify tonight, God was merciful and God was good. And out of some of the darkest trials of life, some of the biggest blessings came afterwards out of it. I don't know what you're going through tonight, but I promise you this, His grace is sufficient. He's not going to put on you more than what you can go through. And He's going to bless you. He's full of pity, and He'll take care of you. And He may give you more than the end than you had before. I want to close with this little song. If Sister will come to the piano, I want to close this little song. It's an old song, but McCamey sang it. It says this: God will make this trial a blessing, though it brings me to my knees. Though tears flow like a river, in Him there's sweet relief. There's no need to be discouraged. There's no need to talk defeat. God will make this trial a blessing, and the whole wide world will see. Hey, God will take care of us, folks. I don't know what your in all this is tonight, but God's grace is sufficient. He's not going to allow more to be put on you than what you, looking to Him, can go through. And He knows what you're going through. And there's a blessing, I believe, for you down the road. Just hang in there, my child. Joy's coming in the morning. Amen. It's like that one preacher said one time. They said, "What's your favorite verse in the Bible?" He said, "My favorite verse is, and it came to pass." God's going to put an end. God's going to make an end to whatever you're going through. What is the end of all this for you tonight? Do you need God's grace? Do you need His help? You need His strength? Hey, He's right here if you want to come. Stand with me if you would, please. Heads bowed and eyes closed. If you feel the need to come tonight, you want to talk to the Lord. If you need grace, strength, you need help tonight in all this, hey, come. Let Him help you. He's there to help.